Welcome to Legal Wellbeing in Action, the podcast series of the New Mexico Wellbeing Committee. We're back for season 2 of our podcast series, and this year we'll be focusing on a brand new campaign called What a Healthy Legal Community Looks Like. Last year, we focused on you, our listeners, as the individual, but this year the Wellbeing Campaign is really looking to understand the state of well-being in a legal organization and enlist those leaders to help define what well-being looks like for that populace, identify priorities in the community, measure, evaluate, and improve. The New Mexico Wellbeing Committee would love to hear from you and your legal community and work environment. What health and well-being initiatives are in place where you work? What ideas do you and your colleagues have for improvement? And last but not least, what practice, resource, or service is in place where you work that you're particularly proud of? Our first 2 episodes will feature the solo and small firm community of New Mexico. I think it's worth noting that solo and small firm make up about 50% of our entire New Mexico membership, and there's just so many different perspectives to hear from. Our speakers, who I believe some of you may know, are here with me to talk about their own perspectives of well-being and some of the obstacles they face in their solo and small firm practice. So today I have Mr. Briggs Cheney, Miss Tina Cruz, and Mr. Jim Wilkey to speak with us about that. Hello, you 3, and I am so excited to hear your thoughts on this. A big thank you to Briggs Cheney for returning to yet another episode, and a huge thank you to all 3 of you for being here today on Legal Wellbeing in Action. I also need to note a big thank you to our listeners who have supported us in our first year in 2021 and onward. We hope to hear from all of you, and as always, we hope you enjoy.
Well, thank you, Tanessa, for that introduction, and thank you for having us on Legal Wellbeing in Action. Today's episode is the first of 2 podcasts, which are accompanied by 2 separate articles focusing on well-being of the solo and small firm lawyers. Today, we are discussing the realities of being a solo or a small firm lawyer, and whether or not solos and small firm lawyers can have the luxury of well-being in their lives. I am joined today by 2, I'll say wonderful people, but more importantly for me, 2 good friends. First is Tina Cruz, and the other is Jim Wilkey. And let's start off. Tina, why don't you just introduce yourself briefly for the audience?
Hi, Briggs. Thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure to be able to visit with you. My name is Tina Cruz. I am a sole practitioner based primarily out of Taos. I also have an office in Santa Fe, having practiced law for 20 years now. Some may know me from having served as state bar president in 2020. That's the year when the Committee on Wellbeing was established within the state bar, and it's terrific to see that work continues to grow in no small part because of the efforts that you undertake, Briggs. So thank you for continuing to be an advocate for well-being.
Thank you, Tina. Those are kind words, and coming from you particularly kind. Thank you. And Jim, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, Briggs. My name's Jim Wilkey. I am I guess going on 10 years now in a small firm. Most of my practice is professional malpractice defense. And I've been here in this current firm where you serve as of counsel now for 8 years. And so I guess we share a wall, and I come to you with all my issues when I freak out on a given case. But yeah, no, I'm excited to be here. It's an interesting topic, and it's probably one that I think lawyers need more than they are willing to admit. So I'm interested to see what you have to say.
Well, thank you. And maybe before we go further, I'm Briggs Cheney, and I might tell everyone I work for Jim, but we do at least, there's a wall between us. I've practiced for a long time in New Mexico, and interestingly, probably is the fact that a good part of my practice has for 49 years focused on helping lawyers. So this for me, this topic is particularly interesting. But I'm going to be more the moderator today. I'm more interested in what the two of you have to share with us. And as Tina mentioned at the outset, when she was president of the state bar, well-being was all of a sudden the hot topic. A hot topic for a good reason. There'd been, for the first time, a really significant study that made all of us realize that how important our well-being as lawyers is. And part of what the program for the next year in the well-being committee is looking at different legal communities. And so we're starting off this month with a legal community that we've identified, and that's us solo lawyers and small firm lawyers. So maybe a good starting point is to ask both of you, and I'll start with Tina, but why is the solo lawyer, why is the small firm lawyer, why are we different than maybe the lawyer who works for the large law firm in Santa Fe or Albuquerque, or for the lawyer who works for an agency or might be working for the public defender's office or a district attorney? What makes us different? Are we, for whatever reason, unique from all those folks? So Tina, I'm picking on you first.
Thanks, Briggs. As you well know, the practice of law is challenging for most everyone in some form or fashion. The sole practitioner faces unique challenges and obstacles in the practice, and also encounters unique blessings as well. I mean, there's got to be a balance when you look at things of this type. With regard to the challenges, in my experience, having worked at civil defense firms for 10 years before I opened my own office in 2011, the business of practicing law is something that immediately comes to mind as a unique challenge. When you're in a firm, in a lot of ways, early in your career, you're just focused on the work and doing good work for your client. You're not really focusing too much attention on the administrative side of the practice and the business aspects of the practice. When you open your own office, you are immediately thrust into the position of having to be a business person. And oftentimes we don't have that skill set. So that's one obstacle that immediately comes to mind. As a sole practitioner, I learned early on that I was spending a lot of time as well on administrative tasks, having come from a firm where there were receptionists, runners, paralegals, associates, an entire built-in hierarchy and structure of support. I immediately recognized that it was a different universe that I was going to be working in, and finding a way to balance those obligations was something that really struck me early on as a sole practitioner. And then, of course, there are many other things, I'm sure, but the last one that really comes to mind is that being a sole practitioner in a lot of ways is an alienating existence. You find that you are on your own in a lot of ways, and you need to be very deliberate and purposeful about reaching out to others and trying to continue that connection that you have with your colleagues, although they may have their own independent office. I was accustomed to being able to walk out of my office at the firm, knock on a door, and have somebody to help me or support me or encourage me in some way. And as a sole practitioner, you just don't really have that. Those are the things that would come to mind, Briggs.
Okay, thanks, Tina. And Jim, having listened to that and thinking about myself, I'm, as you mentioned, I'm of counsel to our firm. And I was of counsel to another firm for a lot of years after having been with a larger firm. So I feel kind of like a solo practitioner myself. But let me ask you, given what Tina said, what about you? You're not on your own or not alone. What say you for the small firm lawyers, and what makes us different, or what makes you different from the larger firms or the folks who work, as I say, for agencies or district attorneys or whatever?
Well, it's a broad question, Briggs. I don't I can't say I know the difference between what working in a large firm is versus working in a mid-size or a solo firm would be. I can relate to what Tina's saying, because I think, the smaller the outfit, I think it's fair to say that we have more on our shoulders, whether it's, the cases we handle or the administrative stuff on the side. So, but I've never worked in a big firm, so I can't say. My friends that have worked in big firms, they do interesting things like have, a lead attorney, a more seasoned associate or a junior partner, and then, a newer associate grinding out the day-to-day on the file. So that's an alien structure to me. I have no idea what that's like. I think at least small to mid-sized firms, it's kind of, you get to run with the file and you sink or swim along the way. I can't imagine what Tina goes through, because I am terrified of ever going out on my own. I like having the support of, I think 7 or 8 lawyers here. And I like the social aspect of it, frankly. I like getting to know all the people I work with, and they've all become my friends and my family to me. So, there's a good and bad thing about it, but the big firm thing is much different. And so I can't really speak to that, but I suspect it's more structured and, less intimate in terms of the people you work with and so forth. So.
And Tina said something that made sense to me, and I maybe said it a little differently when I was transitioning to you about my being of counsel. Tina talked about she's on her own. I might take it a step further and say that sometimes, as of counsel, most of what I do here are my cases, and I feel I'd use the word alone. And I guess maybe I'll ask you and I'm now thinking back to a conversation you and I had out in the hallway a week or so ago, and you alluded to it a moment ago about talking to some friends of yours at big firms, but where they had the ability of saying while they were on vacation, I wasn't worried about, if you remembered what our conversation was, and maybe it's worth asking you, what happened over the holidays with your friend who all of a sudden a rush occurred, and how did he or she handle that, as opposed to maybe how you would handle it as being in a smaller firm?
Yeah. So I think the story you're referring to, Briggs, is I had a case that was getting ready for trial, but we were all but positive we were going to get it resolved. So it had kind of gone on a settlement track. And of course, lo and behold, if you predict things in the practice of law, usually you're wrong. And we were wrong on this one. So I had grabbed my wife and my 2 young children, and we went to Mexico for a week a couple of years back. And about a week, maybe 3-4 days before we left, I got something like 25-30 motions in limine that were filed, and they had a 5-day turnaround. So I spent every morning on vacation, preparing responses to these motions to get the case ready for trial that I thought was going to settle so I could get away to go on vacation. And really, there was no one else to do it. So that's kind of what it was. But I remember getting back to Albuquerque, and obviously we had gotten the case in a position where it needed to be. And I talked to one of the co-defendants attorneys who's in a big firm, and he described to me why it's better to be in the big firm, and said, look, while you were on vacation, spending your mornings drafting responses to motions in limine, I handed that off to my junior associate, and then really enjoyed my own Christmas break and holiday. So I that's kind of summed it up for me as to what I know about big firms versus solos and small firms. So,
well, do you feel alone in your small firm?
No, but it's a good question, Briggs, because it depends on the firm, and it depends on how many years you've been doing this. Because my first 2 to 5 years, there were lots of times when I felt like I was all alone and I was in a hole and I was never going to figure out how to do any of this. So, and I still feel like that from time to time, but it takes a little bit of experience and, perspective, I think, along the way. So,
Okay, well, let me shift gears a little bit. And Tina, and you mentioned that you have the luxury, or we have the luxury because you're here, of the fact that you worked in what I might call a small firm, and today now you're Tina Cruz, lady lawyer on your own. What are the obstacles? Having the luxury or the ability of knowing what it used to be or what you did experience, what are the obstacles you face today just being literally a sole practitioner?
Well, the obstacles, I think, primarily relate to managing multiple obligations along the way, right? If it relates to the business side of the work, the administrative aspects, bringing in new clients, tending to the work that you have, and juggling all of it in a lot of ways, I think, is what immediately comes to mind. And it directly relates to the topic today of well-being, and that, finding ways within which to best manage your time to feel like you're being productive, that you're attending to what presently needs to be done, and also future forecasting as to what you need to have in the hopper so that you can sustain the practice. All of that in a lot of ways can be very challenging. Leading up to this conversation with you and Jim today, we had a brief meeting where I mentioned that I'm not sure that I'm exactly the attorney that you'd want to have for this type of podcast, because in some ways I don't feel like I'm the picture of well-being, because oftentimes there are just things that come up where you feel like maybe you are underwater or you're struggling, but you find ways to recalibrate and continue to push forward. And that's the reality, I think, that most sole practitioners face in some form or fashion. And, being able to talk about this today from an obstacle perspective, and then when we regroup at some point at a later date and talk about, ideas with regard to how to best manage the obstacles and challenges. I know for one, I'm going to be learning from both you and Jim. So I'm thankful that we're having this dialogue, and hopefully it'll spur continued dialogue with other sole practitioners so that this is something that continues to be an ongoing dialogue.
Great. And Tina, that's wonderful. You did a perfect job of not crossing that line, because you're right. We are going to have another chance for all of us to talk about some of those things, but you framed those issues very well for the solo. And Jim, you and I, about 10 minutes ago, we're outside my office and talking about something you were dealing with, and I said something to you about our podcast this afternoon, and you said to me, I may be the wrong person here. I am not the epitome of well-being. And I said, that's why I picked you or selected you. So tell us, what are those obstacles? Why are you not the one I should have selected?
Yeah, no, I'm better at the cautionary tale, I think. Don't do what I do, kind of thing. No, I mean, it's there's ebbs and flows, I think, in the practice of law, and you can get into periods where you're, I think, like Tina said, underwater. You've got more work than you can handle, and you can easily get yourself into a position where you don't even know where to begin. Which problem do I deal with first? So I think that's most lawyers that I know. They get into that situation pretty fast. And I don't know. I suppose the older you get and the more perspective you have, you start to realize that that's just part of the deal. You can easily get overwhelmed with work, and if you're doing a good job, chances are more work's going to get piled on. Like Tina mentioned, with respect to generating business and getting more work in. I mean, probably the best way, I think, to get more work in is to do a good job on your existing cases. And then sure enough, you'll be swamped with more cases. So being able to handle that from a mental standpoint takes a lot of time and practice. And frankly, that's everyone in a small firm. So a lot of times we're all in our own little private worlds of being overwhelmed, and that can have significant downsides for sure. So, I can't say I have any magic on how to deal with that, but I certainly recognize the issue for what it is. So,
and I'm going to press you a little bit because I do see you on a regular basis, and I get to watch you. You're kind of like a test tube for me. And this is we're with a very nice firm and good people, but do you, Tina and I have talked about, we've admitted that we sometimes feel alone, even in a small firm, even with 6 or 7 lawyers. Is that feeling, whether it be because you feel alone or because, is there a feeling in a small firm that you're a little law firm and you have to show off, or you have to keep up, or you have things that people you have to impress, or do you, I guess that maybe that's a question. I'll stop there. Maybe not a good question, but if I'm not making sense, you can tell me. It's like I tell all my witnesses in depositions.
Well, I was trying to figure out if that's a broad question for me. I mean, I don't know if I feel like I've got to keep up. There's always productivity issues in a law firm. I think that's everywhere, from a solo like Tina all the way up, but that's hard to say. I think the pressures in a small firm have to do with doing good work and then keeping your clients happy, keeping referral sources for your clients happy. So at least on the defense side, there's a network of folks that you rely on to bring in the work, and so there are all those pressures. I think it's easy to get caught up in those pressures, as opposed to looking at the case and the client in front of you and just doing the job that you're hired to do. So I think it's a real struggle to sort of resist those pressures and set all that stuff aside and do the job that you need to do for the client. And that's kind of when you excel. But yeah, I think from a business standpoint, there's challenges for sure.
Well, and I always, I'm of counsel here. I was of counsel with another firm for well over 20 years after working with being a shareholder in a larger firm. And in that, those years when I was of counsel, when it was just me, one of the things, and I still fight it today, I feel like I have to be here at 8 o'clock. I mean, no one else is paying me. Whatever I earn myself, I get. If I go to lunch and I stay too long for lunch and I come in, I feel as if that I'm late. And it's just, it's one of those things I've never been able, I always feel as if people are watching me as if I have certain requirements, and even though that isn't the case, but it has been one of my struggles, and maybe we'll talk about it when we adjourn or when we get together the next time to talk about things that we've worked on to help ourselves. But anything else, Tina, let me ask you, anything else you would add to the discussion today about why we're different, putting us all in one category here? Why are we different than the folks that I say have a luxury of being in a bigger firm or whatnot?
Sure. Building upon what you just shared, Briggs, about this, maybe I would define it as a sense of guilt if you're not there by 8 o'clock, right? Related to the topic of well-being, the sense of guilt if you're carving out time to go and attend to your well-being in some way, right? I've been trying to build in more regimented approach to physical well-being. And if I leave the office a little bit early to go to the gym, I'm thinking to myself, well, can I take something with me that I can be listening to, or just sort of processing work in some way? And I think there's just this natural inclination that in some way you're not attending to the work that needs to be attended to. And I think that's something that's universal, regardless of whether you're a sole practitioner or not. I would suppose, though, that the sense of anxiety that builds in may be a bit more heightened for a sole practitioner, because you know that ultimately you're responsible for everything related to how your office works. So I think that speaks to the challenges regarding, do we have the luxury as sole practitioners to be mindful of our well-being? I think that we need to be deliberate and purposeful in trying to do better. And I start every year saying that to myself, what can I do a little bit differently this year? And it's already the beginning of February 2022. And I realized that maybe I'm not living up to what I thought I could do from a well-being perspective. If I were to step away from this monitor, Briggs, behind me, you would see a meditation cushion behind me, because I wanted to be a little bit more focused on meditation this year. The meditation cushion has not yet been used this year, but a visitor recently asked me, do you bring your dog to the office? Do you bring your dog to the office? Like, no, I do not bring my dog to the office. That's my meditation pillow, which has not been put to good use this year. So I think it's just one of those things where we just have to remind ourselves that we should try in some way to do better and not feel guilty about taking care of ourselves. Because if we're taking care of ourselves, we're better attorneys, we're better family members, whether you're married, have a partner, or just in terms of your interactions with your social circle in some way. It's just something that we need to try to do, and I'm going to write that down to remind myself that I need to do that for myself, and I hope we all can do that in some way.
Well, that's a wonderful story. I guess if had it been me, I might have told him, yes, that's for the dog. But you're too honest, Tina. Well, you said it. You say it better than I do. There is that feeling of guilt, and that gives me a chance. I know we're probably getting close on time, but Tina and I work for ourselves, and how much I make is how much I make. But you work in a small firm, Jim. Do you feel, are there pressures? I mean, they're all nice people. I know the people you work for, but are there pressures do you feel the pressures of, I have to produce?
Sure. I mean, Briggs, I think that's lawyers face two areas of pressures on that, because I think the whole experience of law school and then learning how to practice your first couple of years really is, I think it's a pressure cooker. I mean, it's really hard to make the transition from all the stuff you learn in the law school, and then learning how to apply part of that in some coherent fashion. I think there's just lots of pressure to do this right, and that's drummed into us because we have a lot of obligations to our clients, and that's sort of part of the deal. And then with law firms, small mid-sized ones like this, I mean, we don't operate with large margins. You do need to be productive. You can't have one or two people that are not productive. There's just not that cushion. So I think that's just the reality of it. It's probably not something you should think about too much, but if you want to keep your mental health intact. But yeah, there's a lot of pressure to do your best by the client and be productive at the same time. So it depends how much you're going to let that consume your life. I know as a younger lawyer, I felt all kinds of pressure and guilt if I didn't do X amount of hours and do this, that, and the other thing, and I'm a little bit better about that, but not much, but I'm a little bit better about that over the years. So,
and Tina may have alluded to it, and I certainly would. It's been my feeling for she and I. The clients we get, we have to go get them, or we have to, maybe to use your words, Jim, you doing good work sometimes attracts clients. But I mean, I would think, and Tina, I don't know if you agree or disagree, but is that not one of the things you and I have to do as solo lawyers? We have to go find clients, or we have to attract clients, or what we're working on is what we get. You agree?
Absolutely. Before this podcast, I was Zooming with a prospective client because obviously that's just the nature of the existence that we live. It's really developing those, for a sole practitioner with the plaintiff's practice, developing those personal connections so that you can attract the work in the first instance. Doing good work and keeping the client happy as best you can, recognizing that sometimes there are going to be client demands that come in play and they really require some maybe additional attention. It's a different kind of practice for me, having worked as a civil defense attorney and then shifting to plaintiff's work. A very different kind of practice, but one that is incredibly rewarding. And, when we last visited, I said that in a lot of ways, Briggs, my current existence is joy-filled because I do have the opportunity to, represent clients from my local community. It was one of the drivers behind my returning back home to northern New Mexico. Is it perfect? No, I don't think that it's ever going to be perfect. And I think that would be the case regardless of where I was working. Life just is imperfect in a lot of ways. But you do the best that you can, find ways to recalibrate, to learn, grow, and thrive. And that's, I think, the best that we can do. And well-being, again, has a lot to do with that. So thank you for kicking this off. I think this is going to be a great podcast throughout the year, looking at the various practitioners, because it's not just the sole practitioners and the small firm lawyers that matter. We all matter in a lot of ways. So hearing from the various voices that are out there, I think is going to inform all of us in some way.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Tina, because when the three of us talked and got together about this, you used a term, and I wrote it down, joyful place. And I challenged you, or I shouldn't say I challenged you, but it was just such kind of beautiful words put together. And I've known you a long time. And I was curious about what you meant. And so here we've talked today about the differences between solos and small firm lawyers and maybe the other legal communities that form the State Bar of New Mexico. But to hear you say that, yes, there's obstacles, there are differences and whatnot, but for you have found a joyful place. And maybe that's a nice place for us to end today. We'll pick up with your meditation pillow on another day. So with that, I want to thank everyone for listening to Legal Wellbeing in Action, and I hope you'll tune in next month to hear part 2 of solo and small firm focus. And Tina and Jim and I will be back to maybe come up with some or offer you all some at least ideas for all of us that have helped us, or at least what we're trying to help improve our lives. So thank you all, and we'll get together another time here soon.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by the State Bar of New Mexico's Wellbeing Committee and the New Mexico Judges and Lawyers Assistance Program. All editing and sound mixing was done by Blue Sky eLearn. Intro music is by Gil Flores. The views of the presenters are that of their own and are not endorsed by the State Bar of New Mexico. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, or legal advice. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.